Thank you. We have very limited time, so how about if I just tell you why I'm here? Does that sound okay? Over the last 15 years, I've been responsible personally for making that decision of turning off life support systems for 4 people who I care deeply about. I'm a part of your system. Our family's a part of your system, ranging from skin cancer to breast cancer to heart attacks. And so it's a personal issue for me. I'm not just here for fun, I'm here because I care. And I think you're here because you care, and what I'd like to share with you are a few things about how we might do our work better. Does that sound okay? A good friend of mine is Clayton Christensen over at the Harvard Business School. We met about 20 years ago. The conversation then was about how do you ask the right questions as leaders and as people. And since then, we've both chased different paths with that project. About 10 years ago, we did a book called The Innovator's DNA. And that was focusing on interviews with 200 leaders, the best ones around the world, the Jeff Bezos at Amazon, the Nicholas Zennström at Skype, the Pierre Omidyar who founded eBay, to try to figure out what were they doing that enabled them to develop these disruptive ideas that changed their industries. The last 3 to 5 years, Clay and I have been interviewing about 100 people, similar sorts of people around the world, trying to figure out how do you ask the right questions to innovate, because questioning is at the core of this process. So what I'd like to do for a moment is actually talk with you about this word innovate and then move into the questioning piece. Number one, how many of you have had someone in this hospital ask you to innovate? I hear it everywhere. And sometimes it's starting to almost have a bad taste in people's mouth. Recently I was doing this sort of a workshop for one of the largest cable television companies in the United States, so you're already thinking bad company, right? And about 3 weeks before the workshop with the senior management, I actually was a customer of that company, and I decided to return one of those decoder boxes that we weren't using in the house. I wanted to experience their customer service. And so I picked it up, looked online, where is the office? I'd never been there before, drove over to it, and as soon as I drove up, I thought, I'm in for a real excursion here. Because it was this old warehouse section of the North Shore area where we live here in Boston. As I walked through the door, my perspective changed. Number one, there were no lines. Number two, the person who was there, she said, hello, welcome, how can I help you? And I'm like, what planet are you from? And then I go up, I give her the box, I explain quickly what I need. Within 90 seconds, she had solved my problem with grace and goodness. And at the end of it, she looked at me and she said, is there anything else I can help you with, honey? I'm like, this is really interesting. And I said, you know, you've been so fantastic today. I would love to get your business card so I can tell your story. And she looked at me like, what planet are you from, Gregersen? I don't have a business card. I work in this funny little warehouse place here. And then I realized the question was the wrong question. And I said, would you mind writing your name down on a piece of paper? So she started to write it down, and then she started to hand it to me. And I almost got it, but then she pulled it back. And she looked me in the eye and she said, really, what do you want my name for? And I said, I'll be honest with you. I'm doing a workshop with your senior executives in a couple of weeks about innovation. And her eyes exploded. And she goes, you're not going anywhere. I'm like, okay, I'm not. She was a very big, heavy-set woman. So like, I'm not going anywhere. She said, will you tell those guys up there that when they have their big innovative ideas for what we should be doing down here, that those guys up there sometime ought to come down where we are to understand what we're doing? I could just feel the energy coming from her. And I said, and I looked at her name and I said, Mabel, I promise you that I will tell them that, but I will not tell them your name. And then she looked at me and she goes, you tell them Mabel told you so. I'm like, wow. Here's why I'm telling that story. We all know that ideas that create value, that change what we're doing, can make a difference. The challenge is, how do we create the environment where not only people at the top of a company can get new ideas, but people anywhere in an organization can do that. So here's the dilemma I want to share with you for a second. It's related to this image, and it's hard to see in the back. The person is jumping into a swimming pool. He's got a big grin on his face. The pool is about 15 feet deep, so he's not going to hit the bottom. The water is warm. There are no sharks in it. He is going to clear the diving board. Okay, so all that's sort of safe. As he goes off that board, what's the worst of all worlds for him? He doesn't know how to swim. And the worst of all worlds is that he doesn't know how to swim and he doesn't know it, right? Because if he knew it, he would not be going off the diving board, right? And what I'm going to suggest to you is what we don't know in the medical world or in the business world or in the government world is the most dangerous of all knowledge spaces. It's the stuff that we don't know. It's the stuff that we protect emotionally. It's the place that we don't want people to go. It causes us to be awkward, and that's what happens to companies. This guy is the last CEO at Nokia. Remember the telephone company? Who would have guessed 8-9 years ago that I would be saying that and we'd be laughing at Nokia? But what happened in that company was that he did not know what he didn't know. People from the middle level of the organization down knew exactly what was going on and what trains were coming down the track right at them. But the data never got up to him, and as a result, he made poor strategic choices, and they ended up being disrupted and, as you know, bought by Microsoft, and now the brand has disappeared. Gone, done. This is an issue that everybody faces. Everybody in this room. It's like, how do I uncover that area of what I don't know before someone else does? And causes me to either lose my job or who knows what the consequences might be. Let me share you a few symptoms that Clay and I have identified around people who are ripe for disruption. It's almost disease-like. And if these symptoms are there, you're likely to see people who don't know what they don't know in your team, in your space, in this organization. Symptom number one, these are people who are good at being right. They have the answers. Symptom two, they are good at being absent. In other words, they love their office space, and they rarely leave it, and that's where they do their work. Number three, they're really good at being comfortable. And in fact, the more senior they are, the more people there are to protect them from anything uncomfortable. And as a result, they then act very safe. When those four conditions are present, these folks are answer-centric. That's how they look at the world. People don't provoke or poke them, and what they don't know rarely gets surfaced. When that happens, it marks usually the beginning of something bad happening at some point down the road. So here's what it looks like, just a little bit. These folks ask questions, but their Q&A is much more A than Q. It's like they've got answers, and it's a one-way conversation. I see heads going up and down, like maybe you know somebody like this? Am I right?
Yeah.
And when that world happens, the diagnostic question for does this person have the array of symptoms? Here's the diagnostic question. When was the last time someone asked you a question that caused you to feel uncomfortable? Not a little bit, but a moderate to a significant amount. Now, so for some of you, it might be right now. Hal, you're making me uncomfortable. Can we move on here? When I ask this question in the business world of executives, about 70% of the people sitting in the room around the world, when I've done this, I can see in their eyes, they're on the bottom of there. They can't even remember the last time someone asked them an uncomfortable question. And the other issue is, what happens if they did, if you remember it? Were there good consequences, neutral or bad stuff? And for most people, it's bad if these are answer-centric leaders. Does that description of symptoms resonate with your experience? You get it? Now, so here we go. At the very core of that is leaders create an element of fear around them. Let me tell you a short story about a chief information officer at one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in this world. 6 people, we brought them together, his direct reports and him. They were trying to become more innovative. He was actually pushing his team to be more strategic and get some better ideas around here. And we had done some assessments, we'd collected data, and the morning of the workshop, halfway through, during the first break, one of the participants, his direct reports, came to me privately and he looked me in the eye and he said, "Hal, there's something you need to know." And he was dead serious. He said, "I have 2 performance reviews with my manager, the boss we're working with in there. I have 2 performance reviews in a year. For each of them, it takes me 3 months emotionally to get ready for the conversation and 1 month to recover." And he was not kidding. You could see it in his eyes. You could feel it. That's the worst of all worlds. I hope that's not your world. Because when that happens, it's over. It's over. It's a great quote from Lord Acton. Power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The higher we go in a company, the more Lord Acton was right. He was a historian writing about the Spanish Inquisition. And here's my little twist on his phrase. Power tends to corrupt the questioning process. It actually shuts it down. And absolute power, which is what very senior people have, and it could be hierarchically in terms of CEOs, or it could be expertise-wise. The most senior person in that space often corrupts it most absolutely. It goes with the territory. So here's what I'm trying to get at. CEOs face this powerfully. And any leader faces this powerfully. And, it hits me too. I'm not immune from this. And I'm going to tell a quick story about what I mean by this. It's this issue of how do you get to what you don't know, especially when it's personal. This was January of 2014 this year. I was going to give a speech in La Jolla, California. There was a group about twice this size. 7:30 in the morning, I went down from my hotel room to set my equipment up just like we did to give the talk at 8:30. As I walked down to the hotel room, I felt this heavy pressure on my chest. And I'm like, I've given this speech 100 times before. Why am I anxious? I start getting set up, start talking with the executives, the pressure doesn't go away, and I'm feeling anxious. And I'm like doing breathing exercises as I'm talking to this person. Get the anxiety down, get the anxiety down. I get finished, get ready, and it's still there. I'm like, this is weird. I go outside, I'm like getting some fresh air, it's still there. My head starts to be a little dizzy. And I say a little prayer because I am a God sort of believing person, and I decided I'm going to go back in and do it. So I go back in, I give my speech. The pressure kind of relieved. I did the stuff for 90 minutes. As soon as I sat down, the pressure's back. My neck and shoulders start to ache, and I'm rubbing it and everything. 20 minutes later, the break comes, and I get up to walk back to the hotel room where my wife is, and I'm starting to feel nauseous as I walk. What's going on? I didn't know what I didn't know. Let me tell you why. My father had his first heart attack when he was 42. I was 3 years old, and I remember watching him being driven away. Another major one when he was in his mid-50s, and one killed him in his mid-70s. When I became an adult, I was committed to never having a heart attack. So what did I learn? I learned, what do I need to do to never have a heart attack? So I eat right, I stay fit, I exercise every day. I am immune to this. And when I got to my hotel room, my wife looked at me and she's like, you don't look well. And I said, I don't feel well. And so then she's like, what's going on? I explained it to her. She said, are you having a heart attack, Hal? And I'm like, maybe. And so I go online and I look up, symptoms of heart attack. Tick, 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 tick. I look up from my computer and I say to my wife, Susie, I think I'm having a heart attack. We need to go to the hospital now. She had just finished exercising. She was sweaty. She looked at me and she honestly said, let me take a shower first. And she started to walk into the restroom to shower. And I'm like, no, Susie, now, we need to go now. So anyway, we went there. We were right next to the La Jolla Medical Center. We ended up having, fantastic medical care and subsequent care here with Dr. Issenbacher. So anyway, the story is, I had 2 arteries that were blocked, one 90%, one 85%, and stents, and I'm okay now. The issue is the following. I didn't know what I didn't know, and I wasn't poking it. I wasn't going there. I was emotionally protecting myself from it. Happens to all of us. And here's what I'm going to propose. How can we not let that happen to us? Because it's key to innovating. And my suggestion is, we live in a walled-in world when we're answer-centric. I lived in London for a while, and here's what it looked like sometimes walking by the different buildings there. Have you seen these before in London? At one point, they had a tax on windows, so some of the people decided, we'll just brick in our windows. When we're living in a wall of answers with no questions being probed at us, that's what it feels like. It's dark in there. And it's certainly not innovative. And so the treatment, from my perspective, is open up the window. It's like, how do I let some light in into myself and the people around me? So here's the first step. Number 1, how many of you have a problem that you don't have a solution to? And if you add personal into that, we've all got them, right? Okay, so the issue is the following. How many of you are innovators? I'm an innovator. Okay, if I asked kids in a 4-year-old classroom, how many hands would go up? Okay. What do 4-year-olds do?
Explore.
They explore.
They don't ask questions.
They don't worry. They ask questions. They observe. They watch. They try. Don't they do all that stuff? These are the things that innovators do. How many of us were once 4 years old? All of us. So I frankly could care less whether we're innovators or not. What I care about is solving problems creatively. And we get a new solution that's valuable, that changes the situation. And so here's the core of how we do that. And I love this quote. The important, difficult job is never to find the right answers, it's to find the right questions. And he said after this, it's nothing more dangerous than the right answer to the wrong question. We know that. But the issue is, when we're stuck on a problem, remember you raised your hand, I've got a problem, and you're stuck? The issue is, how do we create a new question? Because that's why we're stuck. We're asking the wrong questions. Let me give you a couple of suggestions about how to do this. Number 1, it sounds simplistic, but trust me, it tends to work almost all the time. You got a problem? Ask nothing but questions about the problem. Has anybody ever done this? It's brainstorming in a different version. What it looks like is no answers. You're probably trained in medical school like we train MBAs over across the street to be managers, and that is you give answers. In this sense, it's brainstorming with no answers. And if I were to say, does anybody have questions here? Sometimes people stand up in the back, right? And they're like, I've got a question, but they talk for 10 minutes before they ask the question. You know that? Don't do that. It's just like no answers, no preambles, just questions. I do this on a regular basis. I do it for about 4 minutes. Could be professional issues, could be personal issues. It's literally generating nothing but questions about the issue. Any answers that come to mind if you're doing this are rarely good ones. If they're that instant, they're the ones you already know, and they're probably not going to be helpful. So here's what we're going to do, folks. Does anyone have this problem sometimes? I just don't have time to innovate. Got it? What I'd like you to do, I don't think you've got paper, but if you did, write them down. You had a scribe, but maybe just try it. What I want you to do, get 2 or 3 people. I'm going to give you just 3 or 4 minutes. I know, those folks over there, now's your chance to run, okay? Trust me, try it. Engage with this. You may not care deeply about that problem, but engage with it. Just give it a run. Don't answer, don't preamble, just ask questions. If your team of 3 or 4 is good at this, you'll have at least 20 questions in 3 or 4 minutes. If you have less than that, you're talking too much about the issue. Clear? Grab 2 or 3 people. I'm going to give you 3 or 4 minutes. Go. That's the problem. Ask as many questions as you can. I didn't give you a full 4 minutes because we're a little short on time. But it seemed like you were just asking questions. Did it seem that way? How many of you saw the issue of I just don't have time to innovate even a little bit differently just by asking a bunch of questions? Hands up high. I see about half of the room. For 2 minutes of an investment, that's not a bad return. Am I right? So let me tell you a quick example about this. Her name's Bea Perez. I was there last week at Coca-Cola's headquarters in Atlanta. Bea's the Global Sustainability Officer for Coke. She and I were sitting with someone else from Coca-Cola and we were talking about stuff. And I said, Bea, what are you wrestling with? What's the problem you don't have an answer to? And she told us. And I said, let's take 4 minutes right now, Bea, and do what we just did. And I asked questions, the other person asked questions, and Bea was stunned. At the end of 4 minutes, she's like, I never thought of it this way. How many of you have a lunch appointment today with more than one person? Okay. I'm not kidding. Find 2 people that you can trust with the problem, whatever it is. Spend 4 minutes asking them to engage with you, doing what we just did. And you write me an email at hbg@mit.edu if it doesn't help you see things differently. Okay? Just give it a run for what it's worth. Simple methodology. I've used it on all kinds of things, from how do I give the right speech at Davos to the World Economic Forum to how do I help my dog be happy when she's sad. So it goes the whole range. Questions matter. So the issue is, and I love this quote, is from a person we interviewed at Twitter who basically said, how do you put yourself in a situation where you can ask the right questions? Because whether I'm researching or diagnosing or administering and managing, doing that kind of stuff, whatever the issue is, I'm putting myself in situations that either cause me to ask the right questions or they don't. So let me share 3 or 4 things that help people, seem to help people be in those situations where the right question surfaces. And remember, when that happens, it's going to be uncomfortable, right? So how do we do that? Number 1, we be wrong. How many of you were trained in medical school to be wrong? We're not. We're trained to be right. But honestly, a guy named Stuart Brand, in this be wrong thing, he wrote us a note. He said, every day I wonder how many things I am dead wrong about. He's very innovative. We've run across a bunch of people. Hasso Plattner, co-founder of SAP, one of the big information system companies in the world, same story. Hasso said, that's how I wake up in the morning. What am I wrong about? The more we know, sometimes the less we see. We've got to search for stuff we don't know. It's what we're wrong about. And the way we uncover this, when we're approaching the world with, I might be wrong about something here, then we almost always get out of our office. Because we rarely get provoked to discomfort sitting in our desk chair. We're present. We go out and we talk to people. We use our ears. This guy's name is Mark Benioff. He founded Salesforce.com, arguably started cloud computing. Mark is about as tall as I am. And I was talking with Mark a few months ago about how he surfaces the right questions to get new ideas at his company. And he looked me in the eye and he said, listen. 1 word. And then Mark just locked onto me. He said nothing else after that 1 word, listen. What was he doing? He was seeing, am I listening? And how do I listen? And then Mark said, after I was listening, he said, it's not just with your ears, Hal. It's with your heart. It's with everything. You are hearing people. You're listening. These folks also, they see. I mean, they are paying attention to the world powerfully. They're looking for things that they don't know. This guy's name, so how many of you have done CAT scans or MI scans yourself? Got quite a few hands in here. How many of you would love to go back and do it again? I sometimes see hands up because it saved their life, but rarely. It's an uncomfortable experience, right? This guy's name is Doug Dietz. He works at GE Healthcare. They designed some of these systems. He was one of the principal designers behind making this machine. Engineer by training. That's his background. A few weeks before receiving some awards for making these great machines, Doug happened to be in a children's hospital. And oddly enough, he and his team had never watched a child go through the machine. And he went there. He was asked to walk out because the patient was coming. He watched the patient, a little 7-year-old girl, and their parents walked towards the radiology department. The closer they got, the more she resisted, the more she started to yell, the more she started to fight. And then when she got in, you know the deal, 80% of the time they're sedated, then they're often tied onto the board and they're put in. This hit Doug deeply in emotional level. It was uncomfortable for Doug. He had no idea what he created caused that kind of a response. Moment of truth. Do you run away from the discomfort or do you face it? Doug faced it. And he and his team were like, they did not know what to do besides being engineers. So then they go to the Stanford Design School. They learn some of these things we're talking about. And then they get out of their world into the world to figure out how could we do this differently. And they've got their ears open, their eyes open, their noses open. They are absolute sense makers. And so they actually staple themselves to patients. They go into their homes before they ever get to the hospital because the fear starts before they ever get there. They go to the hospital and they put on knee pads as if they're kids. And they walk through the whole experience at that level. And you see things differently, you experience things differently. They write home with the children afterwards. Then they're like, now we kind of understand the hospital experience. Where else do they process people, kids, in high numbers, and it ends up being a positive experience? And the answer is no. They didn't go to Disneyland, although that would have been an option. They went to children's museums like the Boston Children's Museum here, and they went to preschools and young kids' schools to figure out, how do these people do it? Then they talked to child psychologists about what's the experience. They learned that kids from babies up have to have voice and choice, which for an engineer, they never thought of that. How do we do that? They roll all that data together, and they put together the GE Adventure series. Now, do you have any of these in your system? Anyway, so here's the deal. It's an adventure. Before you ever arrive, the kid gets a comic book where they're explained they're going to go on an adventure. You know, it could be a underwater adventure, a space adventure. This happens to be a pirate adventure. They get the book before they come. You're going to meet these characters. When they arrive, the staff is in scrubs like you, but sometimes they're piratey sort of scrubs. And when the kid gets there at the front door, they put a pirate hat on the kid. And then they're walking them towards the radiology department. And they're telling them about the adventure they're going on. And at one point, you're going to hear a loud boom, boom, boom in the machine. When you do, it's the ship going really fast, so hold very still. The kids are like, cool, that'll be fun. We're going to do it. They get on it. When they're done, you know, they go over, they get their prize, and they swing that little monkey. It's movable, and off they go home. What are the kids saying at the end of that? Honestly, often, when can I go back? When can I do it again? You know, and so I'm going to skip past that, but the issues the following. For Doug and for others like Kathleen Kapson at the Pittsburgh Medical Center for Children, you know, she told me, she said, before we started this process of really understanding the patient experience, my chief question as a radiologist was, how can we get the best image? And after going through all of this, she said our question changed. We were asking the wrong question. Now we ask, how can we make the experience safe and comfortable? And when they figured the answer to that one out, they answered the good image one. They got much better images. More often, better use of the technology, all that kind of stuff. So, all I can say is, you know, get out there, listen, hear, see, taste. They actually have coconut oil running through that room when they're in that pirate room. You know, it's all of it. It's touch. It's all this stuff. It's being fully present. And so some of the things that can help us be there and really understand what's going on is to ask extremely simple questions. They're like 3 words. What is cancer? What is a patient? These are simple words, but think about it. When you think about them deeply, they're profound questions. It could be, the reporter's questions, what, who, where, when, etc. It could be an obsession with what's working, what's not, and why. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on here. And it could be when we're going up to the cancer center on the 9th floor of the building we go to, and it's somebody talking to me, what's working for them, what's not, and why. From the beginning to the end to that whole process. And the key thing here is asking, what's surprising? And that comes back to, I was wrong about something. I completely unexpected it. How many of you have been surprised with something so far today? Not including sitting in here, but before you ever got here. Any surprises so far? That's what we're looking for every day. It's like, what's surprising? Let me tell you, doing the surprising look is a personal issue because we really have to be active at it. I love to do photography, and when I travel the world, I take pictures of surprising things. So I was in Bali looking at the sand patterns on the beach and noticed this light sitting there. I thought that's kind of surprising and interesting. Again, this is in Paris, on the markets, in the back upstairs markets on the north end of Paris. It's like, what's this plastic car doing up there on the wall? And that's surprising and interesting. And recently, in September, I did a workshop, because I love this photography stuff, trying to teach leaders how to be better through photography. And I was one of the participants and the teachers in it. Sam Abel from the National Geographic helped us do this. Here's why I'm telling the story. Because when I started looking for surprises, the surprises started looking for me. About the stuff that matters most to me. Let me give you an example on this. One of the assignments on the last day was to go out and take pictures of frames within frames. So I was out at a car show in the downtown Santa Fe. I took 100 pictures, same spot, that was the window. I was trying to catch something looking through the front window. Boom, 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 boom. I'm sweating, my glasses actually break. And all of a sudden, like 15 minutes of taking pictures, I hear this voice from behind me saying, "Would you like to get in the car?" Now, before I continue, let me tell you what I said. My heart said yes. My mouth said, no, thank you. Why? I was trying to be nice to him. I know it sounds funny. I was trying to be nice to him. I didn't want to put him out. I didn't want to bother him. I was trying to be nice. Then I started taking more pictures. His voice was so inviting, and it was an authentic voice. Would you really like to get in the car? The first time. It stayed there, and I'm clicking away, and I'm finally like, okay, you can do it, Hal. So then I turn around, I go back to the guy, and I say, is it okay if I get in the car? And he's like, sure, come on over. So I go over, I get in the car, I sit down, and it's a totally different view. And I'm sitting there trying to get everything composed and right, and ultimately, 15 minutes after sitting there getting it just right, this guy on the right comes up, his wife then comes up on the left comes up, wife comes up, he looks in and he goes, do you come with the car? And it's like, perfect. Here's why I'm telling you this story. The reason, in part, I had a heart attack in January was because I've lived a life of being nice to people. You do stuff that you don't want to do because you want to be nice to somebody else. And that is what almost killed me, in addition to the genetics component. A really close friend, she was really honest about it. She looked me in the eye after that heart attack in January and said, Hal, you've either got to stop being nice or you're going to kill yourself again. And trust me, that hurt. And then I realized I've got to engage more with the world. I've got to stop being nice. I've got to be kind to me and to other people. And when that image happened, it was emotionally a huge transition for me. Because what I was doing is I was giving 100% of myself to the situation. I was all there. And what was going on here is, it's called telephoto lens photography. You're far enough away that you never have to engage with the world. And when I did some work with Sam Abel, the photographer I was doing this workshop with, he looked at all my pictures, and you know what he said to me? He said, "Hal, great pictures, but I don't know who you are in those pictures." And he said, "Take your telephoto off, put that shorter lens on, and you engage with the world, up close, personal." It changed the way I did photography, and it's changing the way I live my life. So if there's any single suggestion I would make around this one, innovation comes. It happens. And tell me, raise your hand on this one if your answer is right. Innovation that matters happens when you are 100% present and you're really paying attention. Am I right? It's not, at the end of the day, it's not a list of things. It's like, okay, I go out and I'd be wrong, and I go out and ask simple questions. It's not a list at the end of the day. It's how do I be fully present? And when that happens, cool ideas surface. This is a stupid question. Let me tell you about it and then we're done, okay? Comes back to the being present. So I was with my wife, Susie. She's hanging over there in the corner. We have a complicated family. It's a merger and acquisition family. So she had 4 children, I had 3. We got married about 10 years ago. And sometimes, these are kids now between the ages of 24 and 35. It's a complex world, 6 grandchildren. And sometimes Susie and I kind of bump heads and we go to marriage counselors to figure out how can we get past this, right? So we had bumped heads and we're talking to this counselor about the issue. And we're trying to figure out how can we get this solved. And I started looking out the window. And out of this right ear, I heard the counselor say, "Hal, where are your feet?" Like, what are you talking about, Sally? Where are my feet? Yeah, where are your feet right now? And I'm like, well, they're here. And she's like, well, why don't you reattach to your feet and be here? It's a great reminder. Does anybody like Bill Murray? Go online to hear him do it. Do you know what his anchoring question is? It's not where are your feet. Someone once asked him, what's it like to be Bill Murray? And Bill Murray said, I have really no idea how to tell you what's it like to be Bill Murray, but let me tell you what it's maybe like to be you. And he said, here's what I do when I'm no longer centered and I'm being somebody else and I'm doing stuff maybe I don't want to be doing. He says, here's what I do. I say to myself, how much do I weigh? And he says, I feel my bottom, like, okay, bottom's there. And my feet, oh, there are my feet. And you can see Bill Murray doing this, right? Like my hands, how much are they weighing right now? And the point becomes, it's his equivalent of where are your feet. And my suggestion on this is, when you walk out that door and you go back to your job and your work, it might be the people who directly report to you. Be present. It will make you uncomfortable if you haven't been present. Stuff's going to come that maybe you've never heard before. Get ready for it. And when it does, engage, don't run. And if that happens, whether it's direct reports, whether it's peers and colleagues, whether it's patients walking through the door, the more present you become, the more the ideas will come and the right questions will surface, and you will deliver things you didn't yesterday, today. Good luck as you go forward doing that. All the best. That's fine.
Thank you very much. This has been a very inspiring conversation, and I think we have a lot of questions. We have a few minutes before some of us move over to the lunch. Anyone have any questions to put to our inspiring speaker?
You want to use mine? Want me to say it?
I want you to do it. You're doing well.
I know some of you need to run in terms of other commitments and lunch. If you have questions, I'm happy to respond and be a collaborator here. So any questions out there?
I have a question.
There's a question right here.
Okay, here we go. Got one here, but can I go to the back first? Go for it. Can you really loud?
So talk about being made uncomfortable. What do you think of the New Yorker article on Clayton Christensen? And did it raise any issues in terms of disruptive innovation that make you think, oh, I could look at it this way, but made you uncomfortable in a way to think about? What do you think?
For those who aren't aware of it, Clayton Christensen has coined this term disruptive innovation, did it 20 years ago almost, has pushed it really hard, become incredibly successful with it. And then we've got an article coming out in New Yorker that basically says, Clay, this is a bunch of lie. Now, that's my short version of it. My response would be, if I were Clay, as you might imagine, it's a very public sort of criticism, it hurt. Wouldn't it? And to me, the tragedy in all of that is the conversation never happened before the article came out. I frankly could care less which side you're on at one level. But to me, it's just like unfortunate that someone who had such a divergent public viewpoint about another public figure would not go have the conversation. That just seems odd to me. And to me, it's odd because that's where the good stuff comes from. It's like two people bumping heads really hard. If they have a trust-based environment, it's like that's where valuable things surface.
Well, like they were sitting in their office making those comments and when I'm not engaging.
And that's exactly. And so that's my short response on it. Yeah.
In promoting a new idea, a one-on-one conversation is better than one to a group?
The question was, are one-on-one conversations better to get an idea or to promote an idea?
Promote an idea.
Promote an idea, better than a group. I'm not so sure whether it's individual versus a group, but I am convinced in terms of promoting an idea, someone else has to own it to take it forward. What often happens, let's pretend you do what we just talked about. You get out of your office, maybe it's a process in the hospital system, maybe it's a service, of whatever the thing is you're trying to change and promote. Let's say you went out and you talked to people and you observed stuff and you tried a few experiments to see if it would go, and then you become convinced that it's working. You get to that point and then you want to promote it, right? What I'm going to suggest is the biggest promotion is not words. It's getting them engaged in the same activities to come to the same conclusions. Providing them the time and space to watch the patient go through the process or to watch whatever it is you're trying to change. Providing them the opportunity to talk to different people to get their viewpoints and conclusions. Because then it's not an office-based idea, which rarely generate value. For them, it becomes then a reality-based idea. And it's their reality, not just yours. And I know that takes time and energy and resources, but they're well spent because once people get it, like Doug Dietz did with the CAT MRI scanning machines, he had to get it emotionally. And being there, wherever there is core to getting it.
Hal, would you say the same if I'm Mabel? Would you say the same thing? Because I would have to get the person above me to still feel it and experience it and be uncomfortable with it. Sometimes it's harder to go to the office and knock on the door to get that person to, because they're not willing to come out and look.
No, you're right. And here's my suggestion on that. It's that what I would do, and it doesn't always work, but what I would do is imagine two people going to that same person to get an idea moving in the system. Person A and B, equally smart, same background, same MCAT scores, whatever. And person A sits in their office, thinks through it, gets a novel, great new idea. Person B does what we're talking about. Does this questioning, asks lots of questions, figures the right ones out, goes out, collects some data, talks to people, watches stuff, and then actually tries a few experiments, collects some additional data, does stuff that doesn't need permission on, but just does it to figure it out. Then they put that complex of data together going to this senior leader. Who's going to be more convincing? Over here. Now, having said that, I'll never forget Scott McNeely. This was before Sun Microsystems' sort of demise. It was the beginning of the end of what they do well at Sun. They sell big server systems that were really expensive. And then Intel started selling cheap server systems. And so the senior executives, senior ones below Scott, decided we need to get him out of the office in Silicon Valley and get him into a customer space where they've just thrown out Sun servers and put in a whole bank of Intel ones. So they fly them to New York and go to a few banks where this has happened, major customers. And on the airplane ride back, what does Scott say to the rest of the people? He says, interesting, but those were anomalies. He wasn't ready for it. And so the issue becomes, even if we do all this work, some leaders aren't ready for it. And I understand that. But we'll up the probabilities if we do this more. It's evidence-based work where my senses are the primary data collection pieces. And where I would start worrying is if all the data I'm getting to develop my new idea is secondary. It's coming from somebody else, not me, in terms of my connection. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are the nuances, if there are any, between stakeholder buy-in and people really getting it?
So she just asked me a what is question. So what is stakeholder buy-in? What is really getting it?
Really all getting it. Beyond the team.
I'm going to make some real quick judgments here in the interest of time. When I heard the intonation of stakeholder buy-in, it felt more cognitive, just the way you said the word, and the really buy-in piece felt more emotional affect as well as cognitive. Is that a difference we're talking about? Does that capture it? There was one of the first women consultants in the late 1800s. She actually lived here in Boston, named Mary Parker Follett. She went, I think, to Radcliffe College. She wrote a book called The Speaker of the House. Anyway, imagine this, 1898, she's consulting with companies here in Boston. Anyway, you get it. She was a prophetess before her time, and she basically said, we don't need more experience, we need to make better sense of our experience. And so I'm going to add that, we need to make better sense of our experience, but I'm going to disagree with her in the sense that we also need more experience. And when those people are just trying to influence stakeholders with intellectual arguments, I would put money on it. They're answer-centric, office-centric leaders. When there's something from the heart coming into that conversation, I'd be stunned if they weren't out there connecting with the world. Does that? Yeah.
I have a question, and it's really the match between innovation and inspiration. What happens in the shower, what happened to Archimedes in the bath. I can't speak to either cleanliness sessions myself, but the point is there is a disjunction between being present and actually being almost completely absent.
That's right. And so, a real quick response on that is, I've seen a few of the studies. I'm not a neuroscientist, but my understanding is that at that moment of aha, there is a moment of electrical quietness in our heads, and then a new connection happens. Am I anywhere near on that? That's my understanding. I could be off, but that's my understanding. I think that's symbolic of what experience would say around this, and that is, think of yourself. Where physically are you most likely to get your new, aha ideas? Where? Just shout it out real quickly. Running? In the car? Walking?
Someone else.
Talking with someone else? Okay. Do you all know where it is? A woman named Diane Green, she invented this thing called VMware, which is software behind practically every screen we see in front of us, but we don't know it. It's a really incredible company. But Diane grew up in the Chesapeake Bay area here in the United States. Her parents taught her how to sail when she was little. And she grew up, loved math science, got trained in that world. Whenever she confronts a problem that she's vexed and troubled by, what does she do? She goes sailing. So my response is, number one, know where your space is. Number two, go there. Sometimes I get people saying, it's in the bathroom, it's in a shower. And my answer is, take more showers and go to the bathroom more often. I mean, I'm serious. And the more important leadership question is, where does my team usually get their best ideas that are new and valuable? Now, most of us know the answer to the individual question. My experience is most of us don't know because we're not doing it. So does anybody have an answer to that one? Where does your team most likely get their most?
The one thing that I've done, which I found very
Yeah.
helpful, is because I may not be able to go to the shower right now,
Yep.
but I have my own workspace. So I have my own workshop,
Mhm.
which I can go into at any time in my mind. But what I do is I can bring whoever I want into that workshop. So
Okay.
you would be someone who I would now invite into my workshop
Okay.
at any moment and any time and say, hey, I need Hal right now, or I need Christiana right now, or I need
Okay.
Steve Jobs right now,
Okay.
or I need a doctor right now.
Okay.
And that works.
Anybody else? And I'm not trying to be mean to you, promise me, I promise you. But if you don't have a good answer to that question, you're probably not getting the ideas you need to get as a team. Let me give you a couple of very quick examples. So I did some work with Cirque du Soleil. They do all those fantastic shows. And you go to their headquarters in Montreal. You know you're in a strange place when there's a 40-foot brass bronze, clown shoe in the front of the entryway. It's like something's different here. And then I was talking with Daniel Lamar about what's going on there, and he said, and I said, Daniel, where do you get your best ideas? There's groups of people here. And he said, Hal, go to the cafeteria. And so I went down, and you've got people from different companies, different shows, talking across the shows. You got people from the headquarters talking to people out in the field, people who build the sets, talking to people who perform on the sets. It was a beehive of activity. I was actually giving a talk in Chicago last year to realtors, people who sell commercial and houses. I asked them this question. It's funny, their answer, they knew it. I was like, where as realtors are you most likely to get, as a team, new ideas? What would you guess their answer was? Parking lots. I didn't think of it until they said it. It's like, we're going to different places, we meet up in parking lots, and that's where we're sharing information that sparks new ideas. So, if they miss the parking lot moment, they're probably not getting new ideas, and they know that. Last question.
I had a question.
Yeah.
So I once heard someone describe an innovator as the person who's kind of constantly getting beaten up.
Mm-hmm.
And that resonated with me because I think, per your description, part of your role is always kind of feeling uncomfortable. And so I guess my question to you is, what is your advice for how you perpetually put yourself in that role?
Okay. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Specifically, what is your role here? What is your professional role?
Well, I'm a physician.
Okay.
And then the other part of my role is somewhat unknown.
Okay.
To be uncomfortable.
Okay. What started you down the path to do what you do today?
On the clinical side,
Yeah.
in all honesty,
Yeah.
my dad said this is what you're going to do with your life.
Okay. And you did it.
That's right.
Did it ever shift at some point?
Yes.
Do you remember the moment? Or moments? Sorry, I mean, and at any point you can say, Hal, like, back off.
There was actually group therapy.
I think that they were all sort of patient-based, quite frankly, right?
Uh-huh.
So interfaces with patients where you realize the value of what you're doing.
Were they moments of great joy or moments of great sorrow?
Both.
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 Can you remember the people?
Yeah, of course.
How might what we're talking about relate to your question from your perspective?
Yeah. No, I think thinking about that is what kind of grounds you to go forward and be okay with feeling uncomfortable because you're able to recognize the inherent value.
Yep.
But I think that's a hard road.
What makes it hard?
Well, you know, culturally, I think it's fair to say we work in a society that, that is not particularly comfortable with you saying, I don't know.
Yeah,
Right? And
yeah.
so it's generally seen as a sign of weakness or as a sign of insecurity about your position, when in fact it's exactly the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. You got two deep strands going on there. Here's the first one. I mean, thank you. Here, it'll teach you to ask a question, won't it? I mean, here's what I'm hearing. I mean, at a fundamental level, innovators who make differences, they care. Yesterday, I interviewed a guy, Nandan Nilekani, who's a co-founder of Infosys. He's made billions of dollars. And what he's trying to figure out now is, how can we change the illiteracy rate, particularly in India? I could see in his eyes he cared, and there were reasons for it. And I guess what I'm just saying is, no matter what the space, hospitals or not, if we ever lose that sense of conviction about why we're here, this whole innovation thing just becomes a game, and it's largely self-serving. So, you know, for me, it's like, what are my personal mechanisms to stay engaged? And I don't know what they are, because I think they're different for everyone in this room. But if I don't have them, the system will not cause me, generally, to do it, to stay engaged. The system will push me the other way. And part of its reward systems and promotion systems and performance systems and measurement systems, they'll push us the other way. And then we'll stop paying attention, and then our ideas will stop making a difference. The second part is a critical one, and it's around, what was that second part? Remind me. The very last piece. That I can't say I don't know.
Oh, right.
Right. I don't have a good answer to that, because you know as well as I, patients differ. Some patients want you to have all the answers. I'm not one of those. I hate it if a doctor says they know when they don't. I asked a doctor the other day about some issues related to some, I'll give you an example, in your system. Just last week, or was it the week before? I can't remember. And it wasn't Eric, so you can't land it on him. So we were exploring some issues around cancer treatments related to breast cancer, and we've only lived here 2 years, and some of the treatments have been done other places. And so we've had some of the imaging done here, and the question then became, you know, how much imaging can we do without it becoming problematic? The doctor's response was, oh, we have a system that tracks how much radiation you're getting, so we make sure that doesn't happen. And then here was the moment of truth. I said, I get that, and I believe you, but we've got all these other records that are coming. They're going to get here. Do they get input into the system so that it's a full, complete aggregate record? bless his heart, he stopped for a minute, thought, and then he said, what? He said, I don't know. But I will find out. I'll check. I honestly don't know. If he had said yes without knowing, to me, it could have been the worst, most dangerous thing he ever could have done. Because then I would have assumed it all would have been taken care of. If I believed it, if he acted like he was being, trustworthy on it, and then, who knows, X number of years down the road, the consequences would have been had by somebody else, and he never would have known it. That's what I mean. It's being present enough to be authentic about the issue. And you're deeper in this terrain than I am, and I'm simplifying it probably far too much than I should, because you live it in ways that I can't even imagine.
Oh, thank you very
Good.
much.
Thank you. Thank you.